What's up, everybody? It's Michael from the Fantasy Addiction Network coming at you with another player outlook video. Today we're looking at Cooper Kupp, the wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. Lots of good expectations for Cooper Kupp. Some things a bit worrying, though. We'll get into that in just a second. So, looking at 2019, anyone that drafted Cooper Kupp last year got an absolute steal. I remember there was massive discussion before the season even started as to who was the receiver that was going to end up being the value. Well, it turned out being Cooper Kupp, at least for the majority of the year. I believe his ADP was actually the third receiver behind Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods last year, but he finished with 94 receptions, 1,161 receiving yards, and 10 total touchdowns. That was good enough to put him at wide receiver 4 with 270 fantasy points and almost 17 fantasy points per game. Now, he did have a bit of a drop-off as the year went on, came out pretty hot, had multiple weeks where he finished in the top 6 among the receivers, 3 weeks to be precise in the first 8, and then from week 10 onwards, there was a pretty big drop-off in his statistical production. I still believe that there was actually an injury that was not being reported very heavily on. There was a moment in the Monday night game, I believe it was against, I can't remember which game it was. I think it was against the Steelers, but I could be wrong, where they had peeled away to the sideline, and they showed Cooper Kupp's knee was bleeding, the same knee that he had surgery on in the offseason that was keeping everyone away from him in the first place. So I would be remiss to say that is potentially some of that downgrade could have just been a lingering issue with his knee. But there's also the other added aspect of, as Brandon Cooks got hurt and as this offense started to shift to one that ran 12 personnel more and more, they began to take Cooper Kupp out of the slot, and he wasn't running nearly as many slot routes towards the end of the year as he was in the beginning, and that really seemed to hurt him. He played a lot better in the slot than he does on the outside, and that's kind of going to be the thesis for what we're getting into for this year as well. So we lose Brandon Cooks. Now you have Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and a bunch of scrubs behind him. Sorry, Josh Reynolds. Sorry, Van Jefferson. So now we're looking at an offense that is going to be a little bit more tight end heavy. I do expect them to continue running 12 personnel. I keep hearing the argument that they're going to go back to 11 personnel. Guys, I just don't understand that logic to me. It doesn't make sense. I think I've argued this in the Jared Goff video as well. 11 personnel was not working for them. And the reason they changed to 12 personnel was because they needed the extra space for Jared Goff because the offensive line was not performing. And they started playing really well towards the back end of the year when they switched to doing 12 personnel more. They paid Tyler Higbee. They still have Gerald Everett. Why would they not want to use both of those guys? I don't understand. Their offensive line isn't any better either. So I don't get the logic that they're going to go back to 11 personnel. If you're asking me, they're going to have a very similar offense to what we saw in the last 5 weeks of that season, which wasn't bad for Cooper Kupp. I mean, he didn't have any games where he had under 10 points, so I'm not fading Cooper Kupp by any means, but I do think taking him out of the slot, putting him on the outside is going to hurt his upside a bit. Last year, he finished with a 29.2 red zone target share. Obviously, getting 10 touchdowns is going to keep that number pretty high there for you, but he was scoring touchdowns at a 10.6% rate, which is probably going to regress to the mean a little bit, so again, touchdowns are typically a stat that's really hard to project year over year, so I'm not all that excited about him getting 10 touchdowns again. So that's going to cap his upside a little bit, but at least he has the potential to do it. And with Brandon Cooks gone, that's one less person to potentially vulture touchdowns from him. So he could repeat it again. There's not any guarantee that he won't. If I'm going to roll the dice, I'm going to say some of those touchdowns are going to shift away from Cooper Kupp and go towards the likes of Robert Woods and Tyler Higbee. So last year he finished with 525 yards after the catch. That is a good thing. So even if he's playing on the outside, he still has the ability to create a lot of yards after he makes the catch. He finished with a 35.2% dominator rating, obviously finishing with 10 touchdowns and nearly 100 receptions is going to do that for you. Very reliable receiver, a 91.3% true catch rate, which was 7 among receivers. Both him and Robert Woods are just absolutely phenomenal receivers, guys that do not get nearly enough credit in terms of how good they are for this team, and really help Jared Goff out a lot, because reviewing Jared Goff, not the most accurate of passers, but he has some of the most efficient receivers, and they've really helped keep him productive. So last year, Cooper Kupp finished with a 65.5% slot snap share, which was down from 73% in 2018. I was looking everywhere. If you guys can find it, hit me up in the comment section. I'd love to know what his slot snap share was actually during those last 5 weeks when they were running more 12 personnel. I know it was lower. I just don't know exactly how much lower. And something that Nick Ercolano from the Big Dogs Gotta Eat YouTube channel, a lot of you guys probably know him. He actually posted on Twitter a few weeks ago something that was very surprising but made a lot of sense in terms of the drop off in production for Cooper Kupp. When he ran in the slot, he was averaging 2.32 yards per route run, and when he ran outside, he dropped all the way down to 1.76. So clearly he runs a lot more efficiently in the slot. So if he sees a downgrade in his slot snap share, if they're running a lot of two tight end sets, that could definitely hamper his upside. I don't think it's going to make him an unusable asset, but I do think it could lead to him being a little bit overdrafted if people are expecting him to perform anywhere near the ceiling that he gave us last year. On the flip side, though, Cooper Kupp is still going in the fourth round in a lot of drafts, even though he finished as the fourth best receiver in the league last year for fantasy points. So you're still getting him at kind of a discount. Every single year, it seems like fantasy gamers get a little bit smarter in terms of not overreacting to where players finish. So the fact that you can still get guys like Cooper Kupp in the fourth round shows me that there's at least the wisdom of the masses are looking at this and saying, okay, that's not going to happen again. And you shouldn't expect him to finish in the top 5 again, but he could very well still finish as a wide receiver 1. We did the same stat point per game for Robert Woods to show how it was kind of a tale of two seasons for these guys. Just Cooper Kupp started out hot and fizzled out towards the end. Robert Woods had the opposite effect. Cooper Kupp finished with only 12.9 points per game, which was 33rd amongst receivers. So that is the downside to Cooper Kupp. Now, granted, he did have one game where he had no points whatsoever, no targets. I believe that was the game against Pittsburgh. Yep, so the game against Pittsburgh, he had 4 targets. He had no receptions that game. So he finished with 0. It gave you a complete goose egg. So that definitely is going to bring the average down a little bit. So got to make sure we point that out. But still, dropping from 21 points per game in the first half of the season all the way down to about 13 is a really massive drop off. And that is the main concern for me for Cooper Kupp, is switching away from being more of a slot receiver and having to go to the outside is going to hamper his upside, but should also help Robert Woods out a lot, which is why we have Robert Woods rated above Cooper Kupp. We do still have a pretty productive season for Cooper Kupp projected right now. We have him at 84 receptions, a little over 1,000 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Again, that could vary pretty drastically, but I feel like 7 is a pretty safe projection for him, considering he just came off a season with 10. But definitely does have a lot of upside if they can run their offense with him in the slot. If they put Van Jefferson or Josh Reynolds on the outside, I do think that Cooper Kupp could continue to produce, especially with Brandon Cooks gone. And if Tyler Higbee or Gerald Everett end up not being healthy enough to play the whole season, we could see a resurgence of his value. So I do like Cooper Kupp, but he's probably not someone that I'm going to end up getting a lot of this year, because I think there's people that value him a little bit more than I do. So that is my take on Cooper Kupp. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit me up and check out our website. The link is in the description, and we'll see you guys in the next video.